Luke spread 3 colored folders across the church basement table before the coffee had gone cold. The blue one was for the orchard equipment. The green one was for the land. The yellow one held brochures from a senior community outside Columbus. Erin placed her hand on the yellow folder and said, "Mom, this is close to my house. You would not have to manage everything alone." I was still wearing the black dress I had worn beside the casket. Across the room, women from the church were wrapping ham biscuits in foil. Men who had carried Thomas from the sanctuary stood near the coat rack, speaking in low voices about rain. Luke turned the green folder toward Erin. "You take the house money," he said. "I will handle the orchard sale and the equipment. We can settle the rest after probate." I looked at the map inside the folder. Red shaded the rows near the road. Blue covered the packing house and the cold room. Yellow covered the house where Thomas and I had lived for 41 years. My name was not written on any part of it. I asked Luke who had measured the land. He said the buyer had people. For that, Erin slid the yellow folder closer to me. She had already marked a room with a small circle in blue ink. She said it had a garden view and an opening in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Thomas had been dead for 4 days. I closed the folder and placed both hands on the table. Luke kept talking about taxes, repairs, and the cost of hiring crews for the fall harvest. Erin told our relatives that the family had a plan and that I would be safer once everything was settled. No one asked what I wanted settled. When they left to speak with the funeral director, I took the green map to the coat rack. Thomas had worn the same brown jacket to every county meeting for years. His pocket still held a peppermint, a folded church bulletin, and the tax receipt he had picked up in February. I put the receipt beside the map. The parcel number on Luke's map ended in 6. The number on the county receipt ended in 8. I drove home with the county receipt folded inside my purse and the green map flat on the passenger seat. The lane to the orchard curved past the first apple rows, then opened beside the packing house. Thomas had painted the loading doors every other spring, always the same dull white because he said dirt showed before rot did. That afternoon, one door stood open. A woman in tan pants was taking pictures of the loading dock. Erin stood beside her with a ring of keys in one hand. I parked near the office and walked toward them. Erin lowered the keys when she saw me. The woman introduced herself as Marcia Bell from a real estate office in Wapakoneta. She said she had been asked to prepare an early market estimate for the residence and commercial buildings. I told her there would be no estimate. Erin stepped between us and said, "Mom, she is only gathering information. Nothing is being listed today." Marcia stopped writing. I asked Erin where she got the keys. She said Luke found them in the kitchen drawer. The keys had not been kept in the kitchen for 11 years. Thomas had moved them after a summer worker left the cold room running overnight. Since then, one set stayed on his belt, one stayed in my desk, and one stayed with Calvin Brooks during harvest. The ring in Erin's hand held the brass tag from my desk set. I asked for it back. She closed her fingers around the keys and said, "We need to secure the property until the estate is opened." I told her the property was already secure. She glanced toward Marcia. That glance lasted less than a second, but it changed the room between us. Erin was not speaking to me. She was showing the real estate agent that she could manage me. Marcia put her camera in her bag. She said she would contact the family later and started toward her car. Luke's pickup came down the lane before she reached it. He parked behind her and climbed out carrying a cardboard box. He looked from me to Erin, then to the camera bag. He said, "This did not need to become a scene." I told him it had become a scene when a stranger entered my packing house after my husband's funeral. Luke set the box on the dock. It contained orange stickers, a clipboard, and a roll of numbered tags. He said the tags were for an equipment inventory. I looked inside the open building. 2 stickers had already been placed on the sorting table. Another was stuck to the side of the old forklift. I walked past him and reached for the office door. My key did not turn. I tried again. Luke said he had changed the lock that morning because too many people had copies. The temperature log was inside that office. So were the service records for the cold room, the payroll notebook, and the binder with our standing orders from 3 grocery stores. The early apples would not be ready for weeks, but the cold system had to run before the first truck arrived. Thomas had taught Luke that Luke was 16. I told him to open the door. He said, "We can do the inventory first." I told him the inventory could wait. Erin stepped closer and lowered her voice. She said, "Mom, you have been through 4 terrible days. Let us handle the business side until you have had some rest." I looked at the keys in her hand and the tags in the box. Rest was not what they wanted from me. They wanted distance. A tired mother could be helped. A distant mother could be replaced. I asked Luke who had authorized him to change the lock. He said he was protecting estate property. I told him the packing house sat on land recorded in my name. He said that would be sorted out in probate. The county receipt inside my purse pressed against my side. I did not show it to him. Instead, I asked Marcia who had scheduled her visit. She paused beside her car. Erin answered first. She said the family had discussed getting a value. Marcia looked at Erin, then at Luke. She said the appointment had been placed on her calendar the previous Tuesday. Thomas was still alive the previous Tuesday. He had been in a hospital bed at Joint Township, asking me whether Calvin had checked the young trees after the windstorm. Erin said she had only wanted to be prepared. I asked Marcia what property name she had been given. She opened her folder and read from the top page, Hale Orchard Logistics Site. I had never heard those words together. Luke rubbed one hand across his jaw. He told Marcia to leave the folder and go. She set it on the hood of my car. Then she drove away without taking another picture. The first page showed an asking range that was more than Thomas and I had earned from 10 good harvests. Under the price was a note about highway access, loading capacity, and future warehouse use. The second page listed the parcel number ending in 6. Luke reached for the folder. I picked it up first. He said the number came from an old survey and could be corrected. I asked why a buyer was already using it. He said no buyer had signed anything. Erin said, "Mom, this is exactly why we did not want to bring you into every early conversation." I put the folder under my arm. Luke told me the building would stay locked until he finished the inventory. I walked to the side entrance near the cider room. That lock had not been changed. I entered, crossed the dark packing floor, and opened the office from the inside. The desk drawers had been emptied onto the floor. The payroll notebook was gone. So was the spare key log. I picked up the telephone and called the print shop in town. The colored folders from the funeral had a small name stamped inside the back cover. The clerk remembered the order because Luke had requested 3 different colors and same-day pickup. She checked the record. The order had been placed 17 days earlier. Thomas had died 4 days ago. I wrote the date on the back of the green map. Then I opened the folder Marcia had left. At the bottom of the market sheet, under the words Hale Orchard Logistics Site, was the name of the company that expected to buy it. I drove to the lower orchard before Luke could take the folder from me. Calvin Brooks kept a small trailer beside the equipment shed during the growing season. His truck was parked outside, and the hood was raised. He was leaning over the engine with one sleeve rolled above his elbow. He straightened when he saw me carrying the green folder. He said, "Margaret, I was coming to the house tomorrow." I told him tomorrow was too late. He wiped his hands on a rag and looked toward the packing house. From where we stood, the roof showed above the apple rows. The loading doors were hidden by the hill. I asked whether he still had the 3rd set of keys. His hand stopped moving. He said Luke told him the locks had been changed for insurance reasons. I asked whether Luke had taken his keys. Calvin walked into the trailer and returned with a ring that held a brass tag. He placed it in my palm. He said, "Erin asked for these after the prayer service." I told her I had already given them to Luke. I looked at him. He lowered his eyes and said, "That was not true." I closed my hand around the keys. Calvin had worked for us for more than 20 years. He had seen Luke learn to drive the tractor, Erin pack apples for church sales, and Thomas walk the rows before sunrise with coffee in an old steel cup. Calvin did not lie easily. I asked why he had lied to Erin. He said, "Because I saw the folders under her arm." He pulled a folding chair from beside the trailer and set it near the door. I did not sit. I placed the market sheet on the hood of his truck and pointed to the company name. He knew it. He said 2 men from that company had visited in April. Luke brought them through the west rows and showed them the road frontage. Thomas had still been driving then. I asked whether Thomas knew. Calvin shook his head. He said Luke told him the men were looking at drainage work. Later, one of them asked how many trucks could turn beside the packing house. I asked what Calvin had told them. He said he told them the loading lane belonged to the working orchard and was not part of any empty parcel. Calvin looked down the hill again. He said Luke was angry after they left. I asked what Luke said. Calvin rubbed the rag between his hands. He said Luke told him a new owner might not need a full-time orchard man. That explained the silence better than fear alone. Calvin had 2 granddaughters living with him and a wife who needed regular treatment in Lima. A season without work would not be an inconvenience. I told him he would not lose his job for telling me the truth. He said, "That depends on who owns the place by fall." I laid the county receipt beside the market sheet. I told him I owned the land under the house and packing house. At least, that was what every tax bill had said for years. Calvin studied the numbers. He asked where the number ending in 6 came from. I said Luke called it an old survey number. Calvin stepped into the trailer again. This time he returned with a black notebook thickened by dirt and rain. He kept work dates in it, along with spray schedules, equipment trouble, and the names of seasonal crews. He turned back several pages. He showed me an entry from late April. Luke had arrived at 7 in the morning with 2 men. One worked for the buyer, the other carried survey stakes. Margaret at hospital with Thomas, Calvin had written. The next line said, "Stakes placed near roadside ditch." I asked whether they marked the house or packing house. He said no. They marked a narrow strip beyond the first apple rows, close to the drainage channel created when the county widened the road. Calvin had watched because one stake blocked the path of the mower. He found another entry from May. Aaron came at noon, asked about Margaret driving, stairs, and whether she forgets payroll dates. I read it twice. Calvin said Aaron had asked the questions as if she were concerned. She wanted to know whether I needed help with checks, worker schedules, or medicine. Finn told her I had handled payroll every Friday for as long as he had worked there. He said Aaron did not like that answer. I thought of the yellow folder at the church, the room marked with blue ink, and the way Aaron had spoken to Marcia as if I were already under her care. Luke needed the sale. Aaron needed everyone to believe the sale was necessary. Their reasons were not the same, but they had built one plan together. I asked Calvin whether Thomas ever spoke about Luke finances. Calvin closed the notebook. He said Thomas had asked him the value of the older tractor and the sorting line. Thomas wanted to know what they would bring at auction, but he did not want them sold. I asked why he had asked. Calvin said Thomas told him Luke had requested help with a business loan. That was the first time anyone had mentioned a loan. Luke sold farm machinery from a dealership outside Sydney. He had always described the work as steady, even during poor planting years. At the funeral, he had spoken about orchard debt as if he were the only person in the family who understood money. I asked when Thomas refused him. Calvin checked the dates and pointed to an entry near the end of May. Thomas and Luke had argued behind the equipment shed. Luke left before lunch. The next morning Aaron arrived and asked Calvin whether I could manage the property alone if Thomas died. Thomas had still been walking the rows that week. I felt no need to repeat the question. The date had already answered enough. Calvin turned several more pages. A second visit from the surveyor appeared in June. This time Luke came without the buyer. Aaron arrived later and photographed the old orchard map hanging in the packing office. I asked why Calvin had not told me. He said Thomas was in and out of the hospital. Luke said he was trying to arrange a backup plan. Aaron said she was gathering records so I would not have to. Both explanations sounded reasonable when separated. Together they formed a schedule. Calvin took the green map from the hood and walked toward the roadside strip. I followed him between the first apple rows. Small fruit hung beneath the leaves, hard and green. Near the ditch, he stopped beside a wooden stake cut low to the ground. Faded orange paint marked the top. He said there had been 4 stakes. Luke removed 3 after Thomas came home from the hospital. I compared the map with the ground. The red area Luke had shaded included the packing house, the loading lane, and the house. The stakes Calvin had seen marked only the narrow drainage strip near the road. I asked what number the surveyor had called out. Calvin searched the notebook and found a line written in the margin. He read the number ending in 6. Then he closed the book and looked at the county receipt in my hand. He said, "Margaret, I have worked every part of this orchard for 22 years. He tapped the number on Luke's map. He said, "I have never heard that parcel number before." Luke and Aaron arrived before 8 the next morning. I was at the kitchen table with the county receipt, the green map, and the copy of the market sheet Marcia had left. Calvin's notebook was not with me. He had taken it home after making copies of the pages that mentioned Luke, Aaron, the buyer, and the surveyor. Luke carried a black case. Aaron carried the yellow folder from the church and a white envelope thick enough to hold several forms. Neither of them had called first. Luke set the case on the table and opened it. Inside were papers with colored tabs, a calculator, and a set of equipment lists. Aaron placed the yellow folder beside my coffee cup as if it belonged there. She said, "We need to finish what we started yesterday." I told them they had started it 17 days before their father died. Luke stopped arranging the papers. Aaron looked at him, then back at me. She said, "I do not know what you mean." I showed them the date written on the back of the green map. "The print shop gave me the order date," I said. Luke closed the black case halfway. He said the folders were only for planning. I asked why a plan for my house, my work, and my next address had been printed while Thomas was still alive. Erin sat across from me. She folded her hands and used the same voice she had used with Marcia. "Mom, Dad was very sick. We had to consider every outcome." I told her Thomas had been asking about young trees and wind damage that week. She said that did not make him well. Luke pulled one paper from the case and turned it toward me. The top line named an auction company in Salina. Below it was an inventory of tractors, sprayers, ladders, bins, the forklift, and the sorting line. Some values had been written beside the equipment. I recognized Luke's handwriting. He said the auction company needed permission to inspect everything before the end of the week. I told him no. He placed another paper on top of the first. It was labeled as a consent to enter and evaluate property. My name had been typed below a blank signature line. I moved it back across the table. Erin opened the yellow folder. She showed me a schedule with 3 dates. One was a visit to the senior community near Columbus. One was a meeting with a moving company. One was an appointment with a real estate agent. All 3 were within the next 2 weeks. She said the room she had found would not remain open forever. I told her the room could go to someone who wanted it. She said, "You have not even seen it." I told her I had seen enough. Luke leaned forward. He said the buyer wanted a decision by Monday. If we waited, the company might choose another site. He said the orchard could not carry another season of repairs, wages, fertilizer, fuel, and insurance. I asked him when he had last paid an orchard bill. He looked toward the window. I asked when he had last signed a payroll check. He said that was not the point. I told him it was the only point he had raised. Erin said the orchard had belonged to Dad. I placed the county receipt in front of her. The receipt showed my name beside the parcel number ending in 8. It listed the house, the packing house, the well, and the road frontage. Erin glanced at it and said the estate lawyer would sort out ownership. I told her there was no estate lawyer yet. Luke said probate would confirm what everyone already knew. I asked what everyone knew. He said Dad owned the business, and the land had always been treated as one property. I told him the orchard business and the land under it were not the same thing. Thomas and I had bought different sections at different times. The first rows came through his parents. The house and the packing ground came from my aunt after she moved to Indiana. Thomas' name was on the orchard account. My name was on the deed for the road parcel. Luke said married people shared property. I told him married people still had records. Erin reached for the receipt. I put my hand over it. She said, "Mom, nobody is trying to take your house." I turned the green map toward her. Yellow covered the house. Her name was written beside it. She looked down at the map and said the colors were only a draft. I asked why the draft had a sale price. Luke said the buyer needed a total figure. I asked why the total included land he did not own and buildings that were not part of the old orchard parcel. Luke opened the case again and pulled out a document with several pages. He said it was an option to purchase. The buyer had not bought anything. The company had only paid for the right to complete its review. I asked who signed it. He placed one finger on the final page. His name appeared above the words Authorized Family Representative. There was no court appointment attached. There was no signature from Thomas. There was no signature from me. I asked what authority he had used. Luke said the buyer understood he was acting for the family. I told him he did not speak for me. He said, "Then sign the consent and make it official." I read the first page. The property description referred to the parcel number ending in 6. The same number appeared on the market sheet and the colored map. The document gave the buyer access for inspections, soil work, measurements, and planning. It also gave the buyer permission to contact utility companies and county offices. I asked whether anyone had entered the property under that agreement. Luke said surveyors had looked at the roadside. I asked whether they had permission from the owner. He said he believed Dad owned it. I asked why the tax receipt said otherwise. He pushed his chair back. He said, "We cannot sit here and argue over one number while the whole place falls apart." The whole place was not falling apart. The cold room needed service before harvest. One tractor needed a hydraulic line. The west fence had 3 broken posts. I knew the cost of each repair because I had written the checks for years. Luke did not know those numbers. He knew the price offered by the buyer. Erin slid the yellow folder closer again. She said the orchard was too much for one person and the house was too far from her. She said if I moved near Columbus, she could help with doctors, groceries, and bills. I asked whether she had told the senior community that I had agreed. She said she had only asked them to hold a place. I asked whether she had given them my medical information. She did not answer at once. That pause told me she had. I asked who allowed her to do that. She said she was listed as my emergency contact. I told her an emergency contact was not an owner. Luke stood and walked toward the sink. He looked out at the first apple rows. He said the Monday deadline was real. If I did not sign, the buyer could demand the option money back. I had not heard about money. I asked how much the buyer had paid. Luke said it was a standard deposit. I asked where it was. He turned from the window. He said it was being held for the estate. I asked what account held it. Erin said, "That is not why we came." I told her it was exactly why they had come. Luke returned to the table. He gathered the papers into one stack and pushed the consent form toward me again. He said the family needed a decision. I took the form, folded it once, and placed it inside my purse with the county receipt. Then I took the option agreement. Luke reached for it. I told him I was making a copy. He said the document was confidential. I told him he had brought it into my kitchen and asked for my signature. I walked to the small copier in the pantry. Erin followed me and said I was letting grief make everything harder. I kept feeding pages through the machine. She said Dad would not want us fighting. I told her Thomas would want to know who promised away the loading lane before asking the person who owned it. When the last page came out, I returned the original to Luke. I kept the copy. I also kept the yellow schedule. Erin told me those papers belonged to her. I told her they described appointments made in my name. I called Dana Ruiz from the kitchen telephone. Dana had handled the access agreement when the county widened the road years earlier. She had sat with Thomas and me at this same table while we compared maps and drainage plans. She answered on the 4th ring. I told her Thomas had died. Then I told her Luke had signed an option agreement using a parcel number that did not match my tax receipt. Dana asked me to read both numbers slowly. I did. She became quiet. Then she asked whether the number ending in 6 came from a map dated before the road project. Luke was watching me now. I asked Dana why that mattered. She said the county had changed several parcel numbers when the drainage strip and new right-of-way were recorded. The old number might no longer describe the land. Luke thought it did. I looked at the green map. Dana told me not to sign anything. She told me to copy every page, keep the original tax receipt, and meet her at the county auditor office the next morning. Luke asked what she had said. I put the telephone down. I told him the number on his option agreement belonged to the old map system. He said it could be corrected. I told him Dana did not think correction was the first problem. Erin asked what the first problem was. I placed my hand on the county receipt inside my purse. I told them we were going to find out what land Luke had actually promised to sell. Dana was waiting outside the county auditor office when I arrived the next morning. She carried a canvas bag and a yellow legal pad. I carried the tax receipt, the option agreement, the market sheet, and the colored map from the funeral. Inside, a clerk named Raymond Ellis led us to a table beneath a wall map of Auglaize County. He had worked there long enough to remember the road project. When Dana read the parcel number ending in 6, he looked at me before he touched the computer. He said that number had not described a full building parcel in years. Raymond printed the current record first. The parcel ending in 8 held the house, the packing house, the cold room, the well, the loading lane, and the road frontage. My name appeared as the owner. The parcel ending in 6 was different. It was a narrow strip beside the drainage channel. Most of it was grass, gravel, and the slope leading toward the ditch. It had no house, no packing building, no well, and no legal truck entrance. I placed the green map beside the record. Luke had colored the house and packing house as part of the sale. The option agreement described the strip beside the road. The buyer had been shown one property and offered another. Dana asked Raymond for the older maps. He brought a flat book from a cabinet and opened it across the table. Before the road was widened, Thomas family land had been shown as one larger shape. The county project removed part of the frontage, created a drainage strip, and changed the numbers attached to the remaining pieces. Dana pointed to a handwritten note near the bottom. Margaret Hale retained access and ownership of the improved parcel. I remembered signing that agreement. Thomas and I had spent 3 evenings measuring where trucks could turn without crossing the new ditch. Dana had made the county add language protecting the loading lane. Luke had been living in Dayton then. Aaron was in college. Neither of them had attended the meetings. Raymond placed a transparent sheet over the old map. The current parcel lines appeared beneath it. The number ending in 6 covered only the strip marked for drainage and roadside maintenance. The number ending in 8 covered the land that made the orchard work. Dana said, "The option does not describe the property shown on the sales map." Raymond nodded. He said a title company would stop the transaction before closing, but that did not erase the problem. Someone had already used the wrong description to obtain access and begin planning. I thought of the survey stakes Calvin found near the ditch. The surveyor had marked the land written in the option. Luke had assumed the number covered everything else. I asked whether the number could simply be corrected. Dana said not without a new agreement, a complete title review, and my signature. She also said Luke could not promise estate property until the probate court gave him authority. Raymond printed another page showing the orchard section that had belonged to Thomas. That land held most of the apple rows and the equipment shed. It did not include the packing house or the road entrance. Without my parcel, the orchard section had no practical way to load commercial trucks, run the cold room, or use the well. The estate might own trees. It did not own a working business without me. I had spent the previous 4 days listening to Luke describe the orchard as a burden I could not carry. The records showed that he could not sell or operate what he claimed to control. Dana asked Raymond whether anyone had requested copies of the old maps recently. He checked the office log. A survey company had requested them in April. The request listed Luke as the contact. A title research company had requested the current records in May. The title company had asked for both parcel numbers. Dana wrote the company name on her pad. I recognized it from the option agreement. Raymond said the title researcher had called the auditor office after finding the ownership split. The researcher asked whether Margaret Hale was living and whether she planned to join the transaction. I asked what the office had said. Raymond said they confirmed I was the recorded owner and that no deed transferring my parcel had been filed. Dana asked whether the title company had left a return number. Raymond printed the request sheet. The name at the bottom belonged to a woman named Claire Benton. Dana called her from the hallway. I could hear only Dana's side of the conversation. She gave her name, explained that she represented me, and read the option date. Then she stopped writing. She asked Claire to repeat something. When Dana returned to the table, her face had changed. The title company had warned Luke that the ownership did not match the sales map. The warning had been sent 12 days before Thomas died. Luke had not made a mistake at the funeral. He had already been told. Dana said Claire would send the email and title notes to her office. The buyer had asked whether the problem could be handled after probate. Luke had answered that his mother would cooperate once the family presented a complete plan. The colored folders had been that plan. Aaron room brochure, the auction list, and the map were not separate preparations. They were the pieces Luke needed to make my cooperation look inevitable. I asked whether Aaron's name appeared in the title notes. Dana said not yet. We left the auditor office and walked 2 blocks to the recorder office. Dana requested copies of the deed from my aunt, the road agreement, and the deed covering the orchard rows that had belonged to Thomas. The clerk placed each document on the counter. My deed had been recorded 29 years earlier. Thomas' name did not appear as an owner. He had signed only as my spouse to acknowledge the transfer. The road agreement confirmed my control of the loading lane. The estate deed covered the apple rows and equipment shed, but it did not cross into my parcel. Dana arranged the copies in 3 stacks. She said Luke could not sell the full site he had advertised. He could not grant access to my buildings. He could not auction equipment until the estate inventory was approved. He could not speak for me. I asked what he could do. She said he could petition the probate court to be appointed. He could ask for an orderly review of estate property. He could negotiate with me. He had chosen none of those things. Instead, he had signed an option and changed locks. Dana asked whether I wanted her to contact the buyer that afternoon. I said yes. She asked whether I wanted her to contact the auction company. I said yes again. Then she asked whether Luke had access to the Orchard bank account. I told her Thomas and I had both signed checks. After Thomas entered the hospital, Luke offered to deposit payments from 2 grocery stores. I had allowed him to take the deposit slips, but not the checkbook. Dana asked whether Luke had opened any new account. I said I did not know. We drove to her office and called Claire Benton from the conference room. Claire explained that the buyer had paid for the option after Luke signed it. I asked how much. She named an amount large enough to cover a season of payroll and repairs. The money had not been placed with the title company. It had been transferred directly to an account Luke identified as the estate account for Thomas Hale. Dana asked for the bank name and transfer date. Claire gave both. The transfer had occurred 6 days before Thomas died. I stared at the colored map on Dana's table. At the church, Luke had spoken as if probate had forced him to move quickly after the funeral. The money had moved while Thomas was still alive. Dana called the bank and asked for its estate services department. She did not claim fraud. She did not accuse Luke. She gave the account name, Thomas' full name, and the date of death. The bank employee would not discuss the balance without documents. She did confirm that a formal estate account normally required a death certificate and court appointment. Luke had neither when the money arrived. Dana ended the call and wrote 3 words on her legal pad. Account may differ. I asked what that meant. She said Luke might have opened a business account using an informal name. He might have used his own account and labeled it for the buyer. He might have promised that proper estate papers would follow. Each answer created a different problem. Dana gathered the option agreement, the title warning, and the county records into one file. She said she would send written notice to the buyer before the end of the day. The notice would state that Luke lacked authority, the property description did not include the advertised buildings, and I had not approved access or sale. I asked what would happen next. She said the buyer would likely stop all work and ask for the option money back. I thought of Luke saying the family needed a decision by Monday. The deadline did not belong to the orchard, it belonged to the money. Dana looked at me across the table. She asked whether Luke had already filed anything with the probate court. I said Aaron claimed probate would confirm everything, but neither of them had shown me a filing. Dana opened the court website and searched Thomas' name. There was no estate case, no application, no appointment, no authority. She turned the screen toward me. Then she asked the question that made the colored map look smaller than it had at the funeral. Had Luke opened an estate account before there was an estate? Dana sent the notices before noon. By 3, the auction company canceled its inspection. The title company froze its work. The buyer stopped every survey and utility request tied to the option. Luke called me 6 times. I did not answer. Aaron called twice, then sent a message saying the family needed to meet before rumors reached the church. At 4, cars began turning into my lane. Aaron had invited our cousin Janet, 2 members of the church council, and Reverend Mills. She had also brought Luke's wife, Denise. The meeting was not listed on the yellow schedule, but the folding chairs in Aaron's car showed that it had not been arranged on the drive over. Luke arrived behind them with the auctioneer. The auctioneer stayed near his truck. He said Luke had told him the legal questions were nearly settled and that he only needed to confirm which machines could be moved first. I told him nothing would be moved. Luke stepped between us. He said Dana's notice had created confusion that could still be corrected. I told the auctioneer that Luke had no authority to inventory or sell anything. The man removed his cap. He said he would wait for written instructions from the estate attorney, then return to his truck. Luke watched him leave. Denise asked Luke why an estate attorney had not called before that day. Luke said Dana was making a simple property issue look criminal. I told him Dana had not used that word. He looked toward the people Aaron had invited. Then he lowered his voice. He said, "You did not need to involve the buyer." I told him the buyer had already involved himself in my land. Aaron guided everyone into the packing house. She arranged the chairs in a half-circle near the sorting line. The orange auction stickers from the day before were still on the forklift and the grading table. Calvin stood near the office door with his black notebook under one arm. Aaron noticed him and said the meeting was for family. I told her Calvin had worked in that building longer than either of my children had. He remained. Reverend Mills asked whether we should begin with a prayer. Luke said we did not have time. Aaron looked embarrassed by his answer, but she did not correct him. She opened the yellow folder and removed a printed page. She said the purpose of the meeting was to create a safe plan for me and a fair process for the property. She spoke slowly, facing our relatives rather than me. She listed the size of the house, the distance to the hospital, the condition of the tractor, and the expected cost of the harvest crew. She said I had been under severe stress. She said I had driven to county offices while exhausted. She said I had hired a lawyer without consulting the family. Janet shifted in her chair. I asked Aaron why hiring a lawyer to review papers signed in my name required family permission. Aaron said it did not, but my actions showed how quickly the situation was becoming unmanageable. I asked what I had failed to manage. She pointed toward the cold room. She said the system had not been serviced. I told her the service appointment was scheduled for Friday and had been arranged 3 weeks earlier. She said the payroll records were incomplete. I told her the payroll notebook was missing because Luke had removed it from my office. Luke said he had taken it to prepare the estate inventory. Calvin opened his notebook. He said he saw Luke carry it to the truck before the funeral. Luke turned toward him. He said, "You should stay out of this." Calvin answered, "You put my work in it." Aaron raised one hand and told everyone we were proving her point. She said the family needed one person to coordinate decisions. She had prepared a temporary authorization that would allow her to handle my medical appointments, household bills, and communication with lawyers. She placed the paper on the sorting table. My name was typed at the bottom. I asked whether she had already sent it anywhere. She said no. I asked whether the senior community had received my medical information. She pressed her lips together. Then she said she had provided a general health summary so they could determine whether a room was suitable. I asked who gave her permission. She said she had been helping with Thomas' care and believed the same permission covered me. Reverend Mills looked down at his hands. Denise looked at Aaron. I asked when the room had been reserved. Aaron said it was not reserved. I placed the yellow schedule beside her paper. The second page listed a holding fee and an expiration date. The fee had been paid 9 days before Thomas died. Aaron said she used her own money and could cancel it. I asked why she paid before discussing it with me. She said, "Because every time I tried to talk about the future, Dad changed the subject, and you followed him." That was the first honest sentence she had spoken since the funeral. She believed Thomas had prevented her from managing us. Now that he was gone, she expected the argument to end. I told her she had not reserved help. She had reserved my absence. Her face tightened. She said I was choosing the orchard over my children. I looked at the chairs she had arranged, the paper she had typed, and the relatives she had brought to watch me sign. I told her she had chosen an audience because she expected me to be easier to move in front of people. No one spoke. Luke picked up the temporary authorization and dropped it back on the table. He said we were wasting time while the buyer prepared to sue. Denise turned toward him. She asked why the buyer would sue the family. Luke said the company had paid for an option. She asked how much. He named a smaller amount than Claire Benton had given Dana. I told him the correct amount. Denise stared at him. Luke said part of it had been applied to legitimate business expenses. I asked which business. He said the orchard needed cash. I told him the orchard account had enough to cover current bills and that no option money had entered it. He looked at Aaron. Aaron looked away. Denise stood. She asked where the money went. Luke said he had placed it in a temporary account until probate opened. I asked for the bank statement. He said Dana would receive it. I told him Dana had already spoken with the bank. That was not entirely true. The bank had confirmed procedures, not the account. I wanted to see whether Luke would correct me. He did not. Instead, he said the transfer had been made too early because the buyer wanted to secure the site. He said he intended to replace every dollar once the sale closed. Denise asked him again where the money went. Luke rubbed both hands over his face. Then he said he used part of it to cover a payment at the machinery dealership. Denise sat down slowly. She asked which payment. Luke said the dealership had fallen behind with a regional lender. If he missed another deadline, the lender could seize inventory and close the business. He said the orchard sale would have repaid the option money before anyone lost anything. I asked whether Thomas knew. Luke said Thomas knew the dealership needed help. Calvin stepped forward. He said Thomas knew. Luke wanted a guarantee. Thomas refused because the numbers did not support the loan. Luke told him to stop.
Calvin did not.
He said Thomas had asked about the value of the tractor and sorting line because Luke wanted them listed as additional security. Thomas refused that too. Luke looked at me. He said Dad would have helped if he had understood how close the business was to failing. I told him Thomas understood. That was why he said no. Luke kicked one of the folding chairs aside. It struck the concrete floor and fell near the grading table. Reverend Mills stood. Luke apologized to him, not to me. Erin closed the yellow folder. She said she had known Luke needed money, but she had not known he used the option payment. I believed that part. Then Denise asked Erin whether she knew about the buyer before Thomas entered the hospital. Erin said she knew Luke was exploring possibilities. Calvin opened his notebook to the page from May. He read the date when Erin photographed the orchard map. He read the date when she asked whether I forgot payroll. He read the date when she asked how soon I might leave the house if Thomas died. Erin said those questions had been misunderstood. I told her the room deposit had not been misunderstood. Her plan did not depend on Luke taking money. She had wanted control before she knew how far he would go, the belief I had carried since the funeral ended there. Erin was not protecting me from Luke. She was using his urgency to create a future she preferred. Luke wanted cash before his lender acted. Erin wanted me moved before I could refuse. Each of them had expected the other motive to carry the plan. I walked into the office and returned with the brass keys Calvin had given me. I placed them on the sorting table. I told Luke and Erin that neither of them would enter the office, packing house, cold room, equipment shed, or orchard account without written permission from Dana or me. Luke said I could not remove him from his father business. I told him he had removed himself when he accepted money against property he did not control. Erin said I was making a permanent decision during a week of grief. I told her the temporary decisions were over. I called Dana from the office telephone while everyone remained in the building. I authorized her to notify the bank, the buyer, the auction company, the title company, and the probate court that Luke and Erin had no permission to act for me or for Hale Orchard. I told her to change every business access code, stop all automatic transfers Luke had arranged, and prepare an application for a neutral estate administrator if the court believed one was needed. I told her to send written notice that the locks would be changed again by morning. Dana asked whether I wanted either child named as the estate representative. I said no. Luke walked out before I ended the call. Denise followed him, but she did not get into his truck. She stood beside her own car with both hands pressed against the roof. Erin remained near the yellow folder. She said the senior community would return most of the holding fee. I told her to cancel the room. She asked whether she could still take me to the doctor the following week. I told her Dana would contact her after the records were corrected. She picked up the temporary authorization and tore it once through the middle. Then she placed both pieces in the yellow folder. The relatives left without discussing the orchard. Reverend Mills stopped beside me and said he had not understood why he had been invited. I told him Erin wanted a witness. He looked toward Calvin. He said she had brought the wrong ones. By sunset, the packing house was empty except for Calvin and me. We removed the auction stickers from the forklift, the sorting table, and the old sprayer. Calvin carried them to the trash. The office telephone rang. Dana said the buyer had received our notice. The company had ended the option and suspended every plan connected to the property. Then, she said the buyer representative had made one demand. He wanted the full option payment returned before the end of the week. Dana met me at the bank when the doors opened. Calvin had changed the packing house locks before sunrise. The new brass key rested in my coat pocket beside the county receipt. I had left one copy with him and sealed another in the office safe. Luke had not returned the payroll notebook. The bank manager, Elaine Porter, led us into a room behind the teller counter. She placed a thin folder on the table and said the account Luke called the Thomas Hale estate. A state account was not an estate account. It was a business checking account opened in the name of Hale Property Transition. Luke was the only signer. The bank had accepted the option payment because the transfer instructions matched the account name provided by the buyer. Luke had told the account officer that court documents were delayed and that the money would be moved after probate opened. No one at the bank had been told Thomas was still alive on the day the account was created. Elaine turned the signature card toward Dana. The account had been opened 8 days before Thomas died. Luke had listed the Orchard address as the business address. He had also listed the packing house telephone number, though he had changed the office lock and removed the payroll notebook before I knew the account existed. Dana asked for the transaction record. Elaine said she could not release full statements without a court order or Luke permission. She could confirm that the buyer payment arrived and that several outgoing transactions followed. One went to the regional lender connected to Luke dealership. Another paid an overdue equipment insurance bill. A third went to a credit card company. The remaining balance was less than half of what the buyer demanded. I asked whether the bank could freeze the account. Elaine said the legal department had already restricted withdrawals after receiving notice from Dana and the buyer. The bank could not return money that was no longer there, but it would preserve what remained. Dana asked whether Luke had attempted another withdrawal. Elaine checked the account notes. He had tried the previous evening. The transfer was declined. Luke called the branch twice after that. He claimed the account held family property and said his mother was confused by grief. Elaine looked at me when she repeated the words. I asked what she told him. She said the bank would follow written authority, not family descriptions. That was the first consequence. Luke could not talk his way around. Dana gave Elaine copies of the death certificate, the county ownership records, and our notice to the buyer. She also gave her the probate filing prepared the night before. It requested a neutral administrator for the estate and asked that no family member be permitted to move or sell property until the inventory was complete. Elaine stamped the receipt page and returned my copies. The same number ending in 8 appeared near the top. Dana said the bank receipt, county record, and option agreement now showed 3 different stories. The county record showed what I owned. The option showed what Luke promised. The bank record showed what he did with the promise. We left the bank and drove to the title company. Claire Benton had placed the old survey, current map, and buyer file across a conference table. A representative from the logistics company joined us by telephone. Claire explained that the buyer had been interested in the site because the sales map showed a loading lane, a well, a packing building, and direct road access. None of those improvements sat on the parcel described in the option. The representative asked whether the estate could correct the description and continue the sale. Dana said the estate did not own the improved parcel. I did. He asked whether I intended to sell. I said no. There was a pause on the telephone. Then he said the company would not pursue the site. It wanted the remaining account balance transferred back and expected Luke to arrange payment for the rest. Dana told him Luke had no authority to bind me or the estate. Any claim for the missing money would be directed to Luke and the account he controlled. The representative did not threaten me again. He asked Claire to close the file. Claire removed the colored sales map from the folder and placed it beside the county map. Luke's version showed one large property. The county map showed 3 pieces, 2 owners, and a drainage strip that could not support a warehouse entrance. Claire said her office had warned Luke about the ownership split. She printed the email. Luke had answered that his mother was willing to cooperate but needed time because of Thomas' health. He had written that before Thomas died. Dana asked whether Aaron had been copied. Claire turned the page. Aaron's email address appeared beneath Luke's name. Aaron had replied that she was arranging a safer living situation for me and expected no long-term objection once I was settled. There was no mention of my consent. There was no question about what I wanted. Aaron had known the sale depended on moving me away from the property. She had not merely prepared for the result. She had helped present my removal as part of the transaction. Dana made a certified copy of the email. By noon, the auction company sent written confirmation that it had canceled every inspection. The owner apologized for placing tags on equipment before verifying authority. He agreed that no employee would enter the orchard without my written permission. The probate clerk called Dana while we were still at the title office. The court had accepted the filing and scheduled an early review. Until an administrator was appointed, no one could claim authority to sell estate property. Dana asked whether the court could order Luke to return the payroll notebook and any keys. The clerk said those requests could be included in the hearing notice. Dana added them. When we returned to the orchard, 2 trucks were parked near the packing house. One belonged to Luke, the other belonged to Aaron. Calvin stood beside the new lock with his arms folded. Luke held the old office key. Aaron held the yellow folder. Luke said he needed the payroll notebook to calculate what the orchard owed him for business expenses. I asked where the notebook was. He said it was safe. I told him the court notice would require him to return it. He looked at Dana. She handed him an envelope. The notice stated that he had no authority to enter the buildings, move equipment, contact buyers, or act for the estate. It also directed him to preserve all records connected to the option money. Luke read the first page and said Dana was treating him like a thief. Dana said she was treating him like the only signer on an account that received money for property he did not own. Aaron opened the yellow folder. She removed the 2 torn pieces of the temporary authorization and held them out to me. She said the senior community reservation had been canceled. The medical summary had been deleted from their file. The real estate appointment had also been canceled. I asked for the packing house key. She placed it in my hand. Luke said returning keys would not solve the buyer demand. I told him the buyer demand belonged to the person who spent the money. He said the dealership would fail if he returned everything at once. I asked whether that was why he tried to withdraw the remaining balance after the account was frozen. His face changed. He had not expected me to know. Aaron looked at him and asked whether he had planned to move the rest. Luke said he was trying to protect the money from lawyers. Dana told him the bank had protected it from him. He stepped toward her. Calvin moved between them without raising his hands. Luke stopped. Dana gave Aaron a separate envelope containing the title email. Aaron read her own words about settling me somewhere else. She folded the page and placed it back inside. She said she had believed the orchard sale was the only practical answer. I told her a practical answer still required the truth. She said Luke had told her the land would pass through probate and that my parcel could be included later. I asked whether she had ever checked. She said no. She had checked rooms, moving dates, medical forms, and selling prices. She had not checked whether I agreed. Luke threw the old office key into the grass. Then he walked to his truck. Before he opened the door, Calvin called his name. Luke turned. Calvin held the black notebook against his chest. He said there was one more thing the court might need to know. Luke told him nothing from the orchard belonged in court. Calvin said Thomas had already made that choice. Luke went still. Calvin looked at me. He said Thomas had not only refused to guarantee the dealership loan, he had asked Calvin to witness what Luke offered in exchange. Calvin asked us to meet in the packing house the following evening. The cold room service had been completed that morning. The fans ran behind the insulated wall, steady and low. Empty apple bins stood in rows near the loading doors. In less than 2 weeks, the first harvest crew would fill them. Luke arrived alone. Aaron came 5 minutes later with the yellow folder under her arm. Dana sat beside me at the sorting table. Calvin remained standing with his black notebook open in front of him. No one had invited Denise. Luke looked at the notebook and said, "If this is about another date, send it to the lawyer." Calvin said it was about an offer. He turned to a page from late May. Thomas had met Luke behind the equipment shed after lunch. Calvin had been repairing the mower nearby. Luke brought papers from the regional lender. He wanted Thomas to guarantee a new credit line for the dealership. Thomas refused. Luke then offered another arrangement. If Thomas signed the equipment and the expected orchard proceeds as security, Luke would give him a share of the dealership after the loan was renewed. Luke said the orchard equipment would never leave the property because the dealership would recover before the lender needed it. Thomas asked whether Denise knew. Luke said she did not need to know until the agreement was complete. Calvin looked up from the notebook. He said Thomas told Luke that a promise hidden from a wife was not a business plan. Luke leaned against the grading table. He said Dad never understood the dealership. Calvin said Thomas understood enough to ask for the balance sheet. Luke had not brought one. Thomas asked for the lender notice. Luke would not show it. Then Thomas told Calvin to stay while they spoke. Luke had not expected a witness. Calvin read the final line from that day. Thomas said no equipment, no orchard income, no signature. Luke told him he would regret leaving the family business trapped in old land. The next morning, Erin came to ask whether I could manage the orchard alone. Erin looked at Luke. She said he had told her Thomas was considering the guarantee. Luke said Thomas might have changed his mind. Calvin closed the notebook. He said Thomas had not changed his mind. He had asked Calvin to write down the conversation because Luke had returned twice that month and described the offer differently each time. I asked Calvin why he had waited to tell me. He said Thomas made him promise not to bring the matter into the house while Thomas was sick. He believed Luke would either repair his business or admit the truth. Thomas did not want me spending his final weeks defending the orchard from our son. That was the deepest kindness in what he had done, and also the part that hurt. He had tried to give me peace by keeping the danger outside the kitchen. Instead, the danger had arrived at his funeral with colored folders. Luke said Thomas had left him no choice. I told him there had been many choices between a failed loan and selling land that belonged to someone else. He could have shown Denise the lender notice. He could have closed part of the dealership. He could have sold his own house. He could have asked me for help without pretending he already controlled the answer. Luke said none of those choices would have worked quickly enough. Dana asked when the next lender deadline would arrive. Luke said it had already passed. The dealership had 30 days to cure the missed payment. After that, the lender could take the inventory and terminate the credit line. He had used the option money because it bought time. The orchard sale was supposed to replace the money before the buyer reviewed the title. He believed probate would give him enough authority to force a broader agreement. I asked whether he ever intended to tell me about the deposit. He said he intended to tell me after the sale became certain. That answer was close enough to know. Erin opened the yellow folder and removed the title email Dana had given her. She said Luke told her the buyer needed proof that the family had a plan. He said my move would show that no one intended to interfere with the sale. I asked whether she understood that she was being used to remove my objection. She said she believed she was preventing a fight. I told her she had arranged the fight before I knew there was one. Erin sat down. She said every hospital call had come to her first. She had handled insurance questions, medication lists, and family updates. Luke appeared when Thomas needed a ride or when someone mentioned money. I stayed at the hospital and returned home to keep the orchard running. Erin said she had become the person everyone called, but no one allowed her to decide anything. When Thomas rejected the loan and refused to discuss selling, she saw the same pattern she had seen since childhood. Her father made the final decision. I supported it. Luke escaped the daily work. Erin cleaned up what remained. She wanted that pattern to end. The senior community, the medical forms, and the real estate appointment gave her a role no one could take away. If I moved near Columbus, she would control the appointments, the bills, and the information. She would become the necessary child. Her motive was not the orchard money. It was authority. She had helped Luke because his deadline created the moment when she could claim it. I asked whether she ever considered that I did not need a new person to make decisions for me. She looked toward the office door. She said she had considered it. She had decided I would refuse because I always refused help that changed the way the family worked. I told her that was not help. Help arrived after a request. Control arrived with a signature line. Dana placed the evidence across the sorting table. Calvin's notebook showed when Luke brought the buyer and when Erin began asking about my ability. The print record showed the folders were ordered before Thomas died. The county receipt showed the parcel I owned. The title email showed both children knew my signature was necessary. The account record showed Luke accepted the money anyway. The yellow schedule showed Erin planned my move before asking me. No single item told the whole story. Together they showed a plan built by two people who needed different things from the same result. Luke needed the orchard turned into cash. Aaron needed me turned into someone who could be managed. The probate hearing was scheduled for the following week. Dana said the neutral administrator would handle the estate inventory. The buyer would pursue Luke for the missing money. The lender would decide what happened to the dealership. None of those decisions belonged to me. The harvest did. Calvin placed the packing house keys on the table. One was mine, one was his. The third had not yet been assigned. Luke looked at it. He said he knew the equipment better than any seasonal worker. Erin said she could help with payroll and medical appointments without touching the property decisions. They were both offering useful things. That made the choice harder, not easier. I picked up the third key and closed my hand around it. Then I told them the orchard would open for harvest on Monday. Before either child answered, I said I had not decided whether they would enter this building as family. The probate hearing lasted less than an hour. Dana presented the county records, the option agreement, the title email, and the account information from the bank. Luke, attorney, did not argue that he had authority to sell the orchard. He argued that Luke had believed the family would approve the transaction later. The judge said belief was not authority. A neutral administrator was appointed to inventory the property that had belonged to Thomas. Luke was ordered to return the payroll notebook, every business record he had removed, and the remaining money in the Hale property transition account. The orchard rose and the equipment shed would be reviewed as estate property. My house, the packing house, the cold room, the well, the loading lane, and the road frontage were not part of that review. They belonged to me. The judge did not decide what would happen to the dealership. The regional lender had already begun its own process. Luke would have to arrange repayment of the missing option money with the buyer and answer for the account he had opened. Those consequences came from his choices. I did not ask for more. Erin sat behind him during the hearing. She brought no yellow folder. When the judge asked whether she claimed authority over my medical care or finances, she said no. Outside the courthouse, Luke stood beside the stone steps with his attorney. He asked whether I felt satisfied. I told him satisfaction had nothing to do with it. He said the dealership might close. I told him I was sorry for Denise and for the people who worked there. He waited for me to offer money. I did not. He said Dad would not have let the business fail. Calvin had already answered that claim. Thomas had seen the lender papers, asked for the numbers, and refused to risk the orchard. I told Luke his father had given him an answer while he was alive. Luke looked toward the parking lot. Then he said he needed time. I told him time was his to use. He walked away without apologizing. Erin remained near the courthouse door. She handed me an envelope containing copies of the canceled room reservation, the deleted medical summary, and the canceled real estate appointment. She also returned the emergency contact card from the hospital. I told her she could remain my emergency contact if she understood what the role meant. She said it meant someone called her when I needed help. I told her it did not mean she decided where I lived. She nodded. I told her it did not mean she spoke for me while I could speak for myself. She nodded again. She asked whether she could visit the following Sunday. I said she could come for lunch. Then I told her she would not receive a key. Her face tightened, but she did not argue. That was the first useful thing she gave me after the funeral. She accepted an answer. The neutral administrator completed the first inventory 2 days before harvest began. The estate owned the older tractor, part of the sorting equipment, and most of the producing apple rows. I owned the land and buildings required to operate them. Dana prepared a temporary use agreement. The estate allowed the equipment and orchard rows to remain in service through the harvest. I paid documented expenses and preserved the income until the administrator completed the accounting. The arrangement was simple because the records were clear. No one needed to pretend one person owned everything. Calvin returned the payroll notebook on Friday morning. Luke had left it with his attorney. Several pages had been marked with small paper tabs. Luke had searched for equipment values, repair costs, and crew wages. He had not changed the numbers. I removed the tabs and placed the notebook back in the office drawer. Then I changed the access code to the orchard account. Calvin and I spent the weekend preparing the packing house. We tested the sorting table, cleaned the cold room floor, checked the loading lights, and called the seasonal crew. The old colored map still hung near the office door. Red marked the roadside land Luke wanted to sell. Blue marked the packing house. Yellow marked my home. The names of my children were written beside the sections they expected to control. On Sunday afternoon, Erin arrived carrying a covered dish and no paperwork. She stopped when she saw the map. She asked whether I planned to keep it. I told her no. I removed the pins and laid the map on the sorting table. Erin watched me fold it along the old parcel lines. She did not ask for it. She did not explain it again. We ate lunch in the kitchen. She told me Luke had moved into a smaller office at the dealership and had begun selling inventory to meet the lender demand. Denise was handling the household accounts herself. I listened. I did not offer to solve any of it. Before Erin left, she asked whether she could help at the church apple sale later in the season. I told her the church sale was open to volunteers. She understood the difference. She could help with apples. She could not control the orchard. Monday morning came cool and clear. Calvin arrived before sunrise. The first crew gathered beside the equipment shed with coffee and work gloves. I gave assignments from the payroll notebook and sent 2 workers to the early rows. The third packing house key remained in my desk. Luke did not come. Erin did not come. That was better than another argument disguised as help. At 8, the first truck turned into the lane. I stood inside the packing house while Calvin guided it toward the loading doors. The driver backed slowly past the cold room and stopped beside the sorting line. Above the office door, I had pinned a new map. It showed the orchard rows by variety: Gala, Honeycrisp, Jonathan, Golden Delicious. Arrows marked the route for tractors and harvest wagons. A square marked the cold room. A line showed where trucks could turn without crossing the drainage strip. No section carried the name of an heir. No color promised my house to anyone. The map showed work that needed to be done. Calvin opened the loading door. Morning light crossed the concrete floor. I checked the brass key on my belt, then raised one hand to guide the driver the final few feet. The truck rolled backward into the packing house beneath the new map, while the first bins of the season came down the lane.